Before the video starts, I would like to issue an apology. My microphone is terrible, so that's why my voice sounds out of pitch at times or a bit staticky.
Howdy there, everyone. This is H.E.Martin Arts. Today is the 100th episode of the Cheery and Dreary show. I cannot believe we've made it to episode 100. It has been absolutely amazing working on Cheery and Dreary. So today I've decided to do something a little different other than a Cheery and Dreary short. I'm going to go into how Cheery and Dreary started, how they were made, how it all happened. So, for today's video, I'll be going over the characters' design history, the history of how I came up with the idea, some fun facts about the characters, some little inside jokes that I've made about them, and all that other good stuff. So, that's the introduction. Let's get this started. Okay, let's start off with the history of how Cheery and Dreary all began. So I was in my final year of animation in college, and we had to do this project where we showed two characters doing the exact same thing but differently, so showing off two characters' different personalities by obviously having them do the same thing but in a different way. So I wanted to do this project in traditional animation, but my teacher told me to do it with rigs animation. For those of you who don't know what the difference between traditional animation and rigs are, I'm going to explain this in a way that non-animators will understand, because I'm assuming a lot of people watching this are not animators. Obviously, if you are an animator, you know there's a lot more that goes into it, the difference. So, first off, rigged animation. Basically, you only really have to draw the character one time, and you attach sort of a skeleton to the character, in a sense, so that you don't have to keep drawing the character over and over and over again. And basically, it's a lot less time consuming and a bit easier than traditional animation. Well, okay, a lot easier, but, you know. And to sum it up, you basically can have the character move their arm, their leg, their eyes, whatever, at like the click of a button. Whereas in traditional animation, obviously, like I kind of just said, you have to keep drawing the character over and over and over and over again. So, to be clear, the teacher wasn't saying this to be mean, he wasn't saying this to, really discourage me from doing traditional animation. He was saying it because, obviously, a lot more people, companies, animation companies, use rigged animation. I'm not saying rigged animation is bad, not by any standards, I have no problem with it. I'm just saying traditional animation, yeah, it's a lot more time-consuming, it's a lot harder, but it can work if you know what you're doing. So I drew these two little characters, and here they are right now. I call these two Beta Cheery and Beta Dreary. Obviously very, very, very different from what we got in the final versions of Cheery and Dreary. So like I said, I wanted to do it, showed the teacher the drawings, told him everything, but obviously I ended up using rigs because it was a lot easier than doing traditional animation. So originally, I was going to just throw these drawings out. I was like, okay, I can't use these. They're no use to me. I completely forgot them in my backpack until like a week later. At the time when all of this was happening, I really wanted to do animation YouTube shorts. Problem was, the only thing I really had at the time that I could roughly use were the alphabet demons, which, quick little fun fact about them, the alphabet demons were actually made 2 years before Cheery and Dreary were even a thought in my head. So that entire 11-minute first video that I ever posted was made 2 years before Cheery and Dreary were even a drawing on a piece of paper. That's crazy, isn't it? And Cheery and Dreary, the first official episode, well, the introduction, I don't count the intro as an official episode, was made approximately 7 months before I started my YouTube channel, meaning that the Alphabet Demons were made 3 years before I started my YouTube channel, and 2 years before I started Cheery and Dreary. So this is what Cheery and Dreary could have looked like if I kept their beta designs rather than their finalized ones. So, what do you guys think? Do you think I should have kept the beta designs, or do you think the final ones are better? Let me know. So either way, back to the story of how Cheery and Dreary were made. Like I just said, I found them in my bag a week later after I couldn't use them for a class project, and I was taking another look at them, and I kind of started to picture them differently. So I started thinking of like several ways that I could redesign them. I drew it out, planned it out, to get the Cheery and Dreary that we have now, obviously. But shortly after the redesigns and after I started planning out a few of the episodes, I ran into a problem. I realized that there wasn't really a lot that I could think of, or at least do, with just 2 characters. So I obviously had to make more characters, which is where Snowflake and Rose started out.
Then once I had more characters, I could plan out more episodes and more plot lines, like Rose and Dreary having their relationship and Snowflake being their pet. And when I was in the process of doing the redesigns for Cheery and Dreary, I started thinking about what type of dynamic they should have, and ultimately I came to the conclusion that they should have a sibling dynamic, because
Best dynamic ever, right? Goth one, cute one, it just works, doesn't it? So with the introduction and the history out of the way, I'm now going to go in depth a little bit about the characters. I'll start off with Cheery because he was the first one I designed, then I'll go on to Dreary because she was the second design, then Snowflake, he was third, and finally I will go into Rose because she was the last character.
starting off with Cheery.
Cheery is the only one of the main characters where the color design on him actually has a meaning. A lot of people, when they first see Cheery, they assume that he's a girl because, he's pink, has a dress. But, shocking fact, Cheery is in fact a male, not a female. So this is where Cheery's colors come into play. When I was a little kid, I used to grow up watching this kids show, which any kid who grew up in the 2000s is probably going to know the show Blue's Clues. And when I was in the process of creating the show, I actually did a bit of research and I found out that Blue's Clues, the main character Blue, was actually a girl the whole time. I thought the character was male, and so did a lot of other people. I was trying to look up the reasoning why people thought that Blue was a boy instead of a girl, and one of them definitely stood out, and that's because the character's color was blue, and blue is typically associated with boys, pink's typically associated with girls, so that's why I made Cheery pink. Because stereotypically, when you see the pink, you typically think girl, so that's why I decided to do that, in making his main color mostly pinks and reds, with a bit of blue in his eyes. And yeah, my entire reasoning for his color palette is coming from the fact that I learned that Blue's Clues was a girl the whole time, and everybody thought that she was a boy because of her color palette, so I decided to do the same thing with Cheery.
In Cheery's earlier design, in compared to his finalized one, he had a lot smoother edges. Like, prime example, his ears were originally smooth rather than tipped. You can see it in the introduction episode, but ultimately I decided to give his ears pointier tips like Dreary has. The same thing applies to his hooves in his earlier design. This happened with Dreary as well, although her hooves mostly stayed the same shape, and I had their fur beneath their hooves, but in the final versions I decided to put over their hooves, and obviously, as you can tell, Cheery's looked very different from his final one. And another detail is his tail was originally under his clothes, but I put it over his clothes in the final one because it was just a lot easier for me to animate his tail that way and his clothes. Now on to Dreary. Starting off, in terms of Dreary's beta design, I do kind of wish that I kept the rips on the end of her shirt rather than just making it flat. Other than that, I think it still goes really good with her punk goth vibe. I just kind of wish I kept that, but it worked out in the end. One of the differences between Dreary's final design and her rough copy design is her bangs. In the original rough copy and in episode 1 in the introduction, her hair is a lot shorter. It doesn't really cover her face as much, but then I changed it to her having longer hair. And personally, I'm glad I made the decision because honestly, I think she looks a lot better with the longer hair as opposed to the shorter hair that kind of just was at the top of her head. Now she has much longer hair that covers a little bit of her face, but it works. And it gives her a little bit more of the punk goth vibe. Here's one of the little inside jokes that I made about Dreary. So to get popular, you have to make a goth character, have that goth character either be or date a demon, and then boom, instant popularity. Oh yeah, and you get bonus points if that goth character is also interested in witchcraft and is LGBT. So there you go, that's the secret to getting popular. Another fact regarding Dreary's design is the reason why she doesn't wear pants. I was looking at a lot of cartoons, older cartoons, newer ones, and I noticed that traditionally in a show, they'll have the female character completely and totally clothed, while the male character is either completely naked or only has a shirt but no pants. So I decided to vice versa that trope and have Cheery completely clothed and Dreary only wearing a shirt. And one final fact about Dreary is actually a little reference I made in one episode. In the episode where Cheery and Dreary are having a staring contest, Dreary paints her eyelids. If you couldn't guess, that's actually a reference to the show Total Drama, an episode where one of the characters painted their eyelids. So that's it for all the Dreary facts, and now on to Snowflake. First, let's talk about his beta design and compare it to his final one. I pretty much got it right the first time, with the only exception being he doesn't have the little feathery fluff on his chest. His chest fluff was added in to make him look fluffier because snowy owls are basically just fluffy marshmallows. Now on to a little bit about his history. When I was in the process of making more characters for the show, I wanted to add a pet character for Cheery and Dreary so I could incorporate pet antics into my videos. But then I ran into a problem as I didn't know what kind of pet to give them. Should I give them a dog, a cat, a snake, fish, something? And yes, in the short where Snowflake is first introduced, the other animals are originally the idea I had for the pet for Cheery and Dreary before I finally went with Snowflake. There's actually a funny story that goes into why I chose an owl to be their pet rather than just your normal common cat or dog, and this is what the story is. So one day, me and my mother, we were kinda in a bit of a, I wouldn't really call it a fight, I'd call it more of a disagreement. If you know my mother, she voice acted in The Lonely Harpy. Either way, so we were in a disagreement, and my mother is really afraid of birds, so to sort of spite her in a sense, I decided to make their pet character a bird. So yes, the entire reason why I gave Cheery and Dreary a pet owl is to spite my mother. And here's a little inside joke I have to go with that. There was no love behind Snowflake's creation, only anger. And the episode where Snowflake coughs up the little mouse in front of Cheery, that was also made as a little joke towards my mother and I having a disagreement. So yeah, that's the really funny history behind Snowflake's design.
My other reason for making Snowflake an owl, well, specifically a snowy owl, is if you're a Harry Potter fan like me, you know Hedwig the Owl. She's honestly my favorite character. Yes, my favorite character is an owl. So I was thinking, you know, what better than a snowy owl?
In the episode where Snowflake hears the fireworks and he does the really angry face at the end, I didn't even know I could make him look that scary. If you're wondering what I mean, when I showed this to a few of my family members and friends, they said his face looked terrifying at the end. I don't know if it was scary to anybody else, but I wasn't even trying to make him look that scary. I just wanted him to be really mad, but he ended up looking mad and scary. Maybe the reason why Snowflake was scary is because you don't really see it coming, like it's just fireworks and then suddenly switches to this really angry Snowflake. Or it could be because usually his face is in just like a not really emotional facial expression. I don't know, either way it was definitely scary to see him mad for the first time. In the short called You Didn't See Nothin', where Snowflake gets caught during a rather awkward moment by Cheery, originally the episode was going to be called That Awkward Moment When, but I thought it'd be a lot funnier if I called it You Didn't See Nothin'. In the short The Magic Words, when I was trying to get Snowflake to smile at the end, it actually took me quite a while to figure out how to get his smile proper, because I was trying to put it in the classical cartoon bird smile, but things kept going wrong. Like his beak either looked out of place or the smile just looked off, so eventually I had to just bite the bullet and make it the smile that we have at the ending.
Fun little fact about Snowflake, actually. Originally his name was going to be Snowy, so Snowy the Snowy Owl, but I ended up calling him Snowflake instead.
That's it for Snowflake, and now, last but not least, let's go on to Rose. Here's what Rose's original design looked like and compared to her final design. One of the most obvious differences is her tail. She only had one sort of tip, like a rat tail in her original, and then I gave her a forked tail in the final. And a few other differences, like her wings are different. In her final design, she definitely looks more like a horse, and in her original design, she was supposed to look a bit more like a bunny. especially in terms of her facial features. When I was first creating Rose, there were two major problems that I ran into. The first problem being, how do I make her more than just Dreary's demon girlfriend? So, to fix that problem, I gave her more solo episodes, like the episode where she screams into the void, all the other episodes where she's had a solo. The second major problem I ran into when I was creating Rose was what should her name be. So I started looking up some demon names from history and stuff, and I started looking up gothic names, but then I figured I should name her Rose because that's the flower that Dreary presents her with when they first meet, so that's where her name came from. Here's one of the little inside jokes I have made about Rose. In the episode where she screams into the void, my mother actually saw that episode, and she said the way Rose's tongue moves when she's screaming looks very, suggestive in a sense. So I made a joke of, well, that's why Dreary likes her so much. So I guess now y'all know the reason why Dreary and Rose are such a good couple.
Much like Snowflake, Rose's overall design is based off of something. She's based off the Jersey Devil. If you don't know what the Jersey Devil is, then go look up the mythology behind it. There is, however, a deeper sort of meaning behind Rose's design and why I chose the Jersey Devil specifically. So, when I was like a little kid, I'd say maybe like 8, maybe, I was really into monsters, with one show in particular called Monsters and Mysteries in America striking my interest. And I'm not gonna lie, I was actually terrified of the monsters on that show. Like, I kept having night terrors about them coming to get me and just how scary they were. It drove my mom insane. Like, I'll give you an example of how insane it drove my mom. So I'd wake up just having absolute night terrors about these monsters coming to get me and stuff, like any kid does. And it would take my mother roughly about an hour, she said, to calm me down and get me to stop freaking out. So she would wake up, have to deal with me, and then have to go to her 8-hour shift at work. So she would literally have to wake up, deal with her terrified child, and still go to work tired. Mom of the Year award right here. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Obviously, I've grown up now, and I realize how hard that was for her, so I cannot even tell you the amount of times I have genuinely apologized to my mom for putting her through all that. Mom, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with the stress of my nightmares and going to work. I'm so sorry. So, back to the show. So you're probably wondering, well, if it scared me so bad, why did I still keep watching it? A lot of my family members kept asking me the same thing, like, if these monsters are so scary to you, if you don't like this show because the monsters are scary, then why would you keep watching it? Like, why would you do that? And honestly, I have to say, even though I was terrified of the monsters on the show, I was also fascinated by them in a sense. I don't really know how to explain it. It's kind of like, even though I was so terrified of this show, these monsters, I still found myself always going back to the episodes, rewatching them, watching new ones, and just being so fascinated by creatures like this. And a little fact about me, even when I was a little kid, I was an artist. So I would start designing my own sort of little monsters and characters based off the monsters. But there were 4 specific monsters that I were really interested in. The monsters being Sasquatch, aliens, the Mothman, and of course, the Jersey Devil.
In the most recent episode where Rose finally speaks, I tried giving her sort of like an echo in her voice, like him from the Powerpuff Girls. So that's why she has the echoey voice in compared to the other characters. In Rose's introduction episode, when she smells the rose that Dreary gives her and she does the spiral smile, I actually animated her smile in reverse, so I started out with the ending of the smile with the huge spiral at the end, and animated it backwards from there so I could get the perfect spiral for her smile at the end. So that about wraps it up for all of the main characters, and now I'm going to be talking about some bonus facts about the show and about myself. I'm going to talk about which of the characters is the easiest to animate and which is the hardest. So I'll be starting off with the easiest character to animate, that is Snowflake. Snowflake is the easiest character because he doesn't really move a lot. He kind of just sits there, doesn't really do nothing. He just stares off into the void. There's not a single thought in his head, although he does occasionally show emotion, as you've seen in some videos. But for the most part, Snowflake just sits there, completely lost in thought, and silently judges you because that's what owls do. They just stare at you and they judge you. Right in the middle of easiest character to animate and the hardest character to animate is Cheery and Dreary. I'd say they're pretty equal in terms of how easy and hard they can be to animate, but if I had to vote the harder to animate of the two, I'd probably say Cheery, only because of the sticks in his hair. And in some earlier animations, I kept forgetting to add the sticks in his hair, and I had to go back and reanimate a bunch of scenes, so that's why he's a bit hard to animate. Another reason why Dreary is a little bit easier to animate than Cheery is because she doesn't really have as many colors as Cheery does. Cheery has a lot of the pinks and reds, and Dreary mostly just has gray, black, and white with the red in her eyes and on her shirt. But other than that, they're pretty equal in terms of the animation because they're siblings, they look the same. Okay, so I know this question is going to get brought up eventually, so I'm going to answer it now. Cheery and Dreary, the main characters, they are siblings, but I know there's probably be a question at some point of which sibling is the older one and which one is the younger one. They're actually the exact same age, so there's no older or younger one, they're the same age. And finally, the hardest character to animate is Rose. There are a few reasons why she's the hardest character to animate, one of them being her fangs. They cover the lower part of her mouth, which does make it a bit hard to do voice acting and her lip movements because of the fangs in front of her face. Another one of the reasons she's hard to animate is her face. She has a lot more of a horse's face, so it can be a little bit harder to get the length of her snout correctly. Sometimes make it too long, sometimes it's too short. Another factor that plays into her being the hardest character to animate is her tail. She has a very long tail. In the short A Message from Rose, the animation on her tail at the end literally took me 3 hours to do just because I was trying to make it flow properly, like how a cat's tail would move. Her arms and her legs are also pretty hard to animate too because she kind of has horse's legs and velociraptor arms in a sense. But probably the main reason she's hard to animate is because, opposed to Cheery and Dreary, who have more humanoid movements, Rose has a lot more animalistic movements. Like I mentioned, she basically has a horse's body, in a sense, like the face, the legs, and she has more of a cat-like tail, which, like I mentioned earlier, all tie back to her being based off of the Jersey Devil. Alright, so this is going to be the final bonus fact, and this is actually a fact about me and all of the comics and animations that I have made so far. So, the Cheery and Dreary Show, the Lonely Harpy, the Alphabet Demons, all of them. So here we go. I'm actually the only person working on all of these animations and comics, with the only real exception being the voice acting, which I get my family and friends to do. So, if you're wondering why I am the only person working on all of this, it's because I basically started this channel and the Cheery and Dreary Show and some of my other comics when I was practically just fresh out of college from animation, so I don't exactly have the money to hire more people to work on these, so that's why a lot of the drawings, especially in my animations for Cheery and Dreary, are a bit stiff from time to time, or just a bit poorly animated. I try my best to make my animations and my comics look as good as I possibly can, but I'm just one guy at the end of the day, so there's only really so much I can do. Now, everything you've seen on my channel so far and for the rest of 2025 has all been drawn and animated by me, with, like I said earlier, the only exception being the voice acting. I do hope that someday I will eventually have the budget where I can hire people, because I do intend to turn this into a business and have much larger projects in the future, other than just YouTube shorts and comics, so hopefully one day I can turn this into a business and hire people, but till that happens, this is all just animated and drawn by me. And for those of you wondering which softwares I use to create my animations and comics, for animation I use Toon Boom Harmony, and for comics I use Krita. And as a special little treat for you guys, I'll give you a little hint as to what Monday's Cheery and Dreary Show is going to be. It's going to be a Pride Month episode. And that's it for today. So I hope you all enjoyed Cheery and Dreary's 100th episode spectacular. And I hope you guys have a good day, evening, morning, night, whatever time you're watching this at. Bye!